Hi everyone, we're going to be talking about our triangle congruencies today. We're going to start with 3 of them, and then the next video we'll finish out with the last 2. But today we're going to focus on determining if 2 triangles are congruent, if they have an angle, side, and angle that are congruent, side, angle, side, or all 3 sides are congruent. So basically we can decide or determine that 2 triangles are congruent if we only have 3 corresponding parts that are congruent. So we don't actually have to know that every single part that corresponds is the same or congruent. So let's start with angle, side, angle. And so we're just going to talk in general terms first. If I have an angle, side, angle, and then the corresponding ones on another triangle that are congruent, we know that the triangles are congruent. So we can say if angle A is congruent to angle D, side AB is congruent to side DE, and then angle B is congruent to angle E, then we can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And right here it says included means the side between the angles. So this side has to be what's called included. That means when you're actually looking at it in the picture, it has to be between the 2 angles. It can't be like over here or over here. Okay, so let's use this, these next few problems. It says determine if the 2 triangles are congruent. If they are, state how you know. So what's important here is to not add in any information that's not already there. So the first problem, it's a little hard to see, but we do have 2 right angles right here. So we know we have an angle, and then these sides right here were marked with a tick mark right here. That means they're congruent. And then the last piece of information is technically not labeled, but we do know it's true. It's this angle right here is congruent to this angle. We know those are congruent because they are vertical angles. So we have an angle, side, angle. So yes, we know these are congruent. Next one, very similar. We have angles right here. They're just not right angles. We have sides that are congruent. And then again, I can see that these are vertical angles. Notice I'm marking it with 2 arcs instead of 1 to show that these 2 aren't congruent, but these 2 are. So yes, these triangles are congruent using angle, side, angle. So we're going to continue doing this for a few more problems. Next one, these are not touching, but that's okay. We have a side, side, and angle. So that is not what we're working on right now, and so we do not know that these are congruent. They could be, but we don't know for sure. Next one, so I've got a side, and then I've got an angle. I also have this side they share. If they share the side, I know it's congruent with each other. So what I have, and I'm just looking at one triangle to see what's labeled, side, side, angle, or the other direction, angle, side, side. Again, not the one we're working on, so we do not know that those are congruent. All right, last 2 on here. This picture right here, we've got an angle congruent to this one. We've got the sides, and then again, we've got an example of vertical angles. So yes, using angle, side, angle. Okay, and last one, very similar to the one above. We've got an angle. They share this side, so it's a side, and then that last one that was labeled right here. So angle, side, side. Again, not the one we're doing, so we do not know that those are congruent. Okay, so moving on, now what we're going to do is determine what we need to know in order to say that 2 triangles are congruent. So we basically just need one more piece of information. So starting with this one, we've got an angle, side, and then what I need to do is find out that angle X is congruent to angle, looks like the corresponding one would be L. So again, it says state what additional information you would need to know to say these are congruent. Next one, we've got an angled and angle. So remember, the side has to be included. So it has to be the side in between the angles. So if I want to say these triangles are congruent, I would have to know that side LK is congruent to side VU. Next one, we have vertical angles. They're not labeled, but we know those are congruent. We have sides right here. Those were marked with 2 lines. And then again, those sides have to be in between the two angles labeled. So we also need to know that these angles are congruent. So we need to know angle N is congruent to angle U. That's the missing information. Here we have two angles that are congruent. So we need to know that the side included is the same or congruent. So we need to know that RQ is congruent to, and I'm trying to write them in the same order, LK. Okay, last two like this. We've got an angle congruent to each other. We've got a side they share, and then the angle that's also congruent needs to be on the other side of that side. Remember, that side has to be in between. So we need to know that angle, and these are both angle K, so we need to name them MKL and PKL. All right, and then last one, again, we've got an angle, we've got a side that they share, and then that last angle that we need to add in additional information is this angle right here, S. So UST has to be congruent to AST in order for those triangles to be congruent. The last thing I have on this congruency, ASA, is some proofs, but we are going to move on to the next one before we start proofs. I don't want to do too many in this video, but I do want to show you guys how to do them. So next we have our side angle side. So I'll take the little label off. This is very similar, just different information that we're given. Now we have a side, an angle that's included, and then another side to show that the two triangles have to be congruent. So in this picture, if AB is congruent to DE, if angle B is congruent to angle E, and if side BC is congruent to EF, then just with those three pieces of information, we know that the two triangles have to be congruent. ABC is congruent to DEF. Again, included, that angle has to be between the two sides that are congruent to the other two sides. All right, so just like before, it says determine if the two triangles are congruent, and so we're going to say yes or no, and then we will say side angle side if we know. The first one, we've got a side and a side, a side and a side, but careful here, these two sides are congruent, and then we know these angles are congruent. So in this triangle, it's side angle side, but in this triangle, it's angle side side, different orders. So we actually don't know that these are congruent. Okay, this one, the only piece of information we're given is that two sides are congruent with these two sides. That's not enough, so we do not know if they're congruent. All right, next one, we've got a side angle, and then again, if they share a side, we know that's congruent. So we've got side angle side. So yes, oops, side angle side. That is one of our congruencies. Next one, okay, so I have a right angle labeled here, and then the vertical angle to that has to also be a right angle. So in this picture, this is a side angle side. Same thing with this triangle. So yes, these are congruent. Last one in this picture, we've got sides congruent, and then again, we always know vertical angles are congruent. So yes, using side angle side. All right, these next few problems, just like before, we are going to decide what additional information we would need in order to prove these triangles are congruent. So we're going to be like missing one piece of information. So first picture, we've got a side angle, so that means I need one more side. That's going to be this side right here. Make sure you label the correct one. And so we would need to know that CD is congruent to LM. Notice the order that I labeled those sides. Okay, next one, we've got side and side. We need to include the angle in between for a side angle side. So we need to know that angle V is congruent to angle Q. That's the missing information. All right, number 8, taking a look at these pictures, side angle. So I need to include that next side. So the missing information is that QR is congruent to VW. And last one on this side, side angle side. We've got side, we've got another side that they share. Okay, so careful when you label the angle in between those sides. For this triangle, it's going to be here, side angle side. And then for this triangle, it's going to be here, side angle side. So again, always making sure it's included. So we need to know the angle UIH is congruent to GHI. See that, so you can see that. Okay. Next thing we are going to do, I'm actually going to skip down to these last 4 right here, just because they're a little different than what we've seen before we move on to our proofs, is again finding the missing information. So for 14, and you'll notice I skipped a few problems, we've got a side right here, but that's it. We do know that the vertical angles are congruent, so we're good on that. But we do need to state a third side. That's these ones right here. So we need to know that UT is congruent to MT. All right, 15, we've got angles, we've got this side that they share. And remember, it's side angle side, so it's got to be side angle side. The side's got to be right here. So that's the one that wasn't labeled yet. So AB has to be congruent to RB. Okay, last 2 on here. Side angle side. We are missing the angle that's included. So angle U needs to be congruent to angle I. Okay, number 17. Angles are labeled. We've got a side that they share. We already know those are congruent. So the side that's missing is this one and this one. So QH must be congruent to IH. Okay, so we're going to move on to some proofs now. We won't do a ton, but I do want to show you guys what that looks like for these triangle congruencies. So we're on side angle side still. And before we do these proofs, I quickly want to show you guys some tips for doing proofs, particularly for triangle congruencies. The first thing that we always do with 2-column proofs is start with the given. You're always given some piece of information, so start with that. Whatever you're trying to prove is going to be your last statement. That's what you end your proof on. You're going to go until you've stated that the 3 parts are congruent. So that might be side angle side. It might be side, side, side. Just depends on which proof you're doing. And then reasons. So your justifications for your statements can be definitions, like midpoint definition. They can be theorems, like the vertical angle theorem. Or they could be postulates. And then the last one is to mark your visual as you go. So you usually have a picture to work off of. Mark it as you go so you know what's true and what information you have and need. All right, so I'm going to do one with you, guide you through the next one, and then I already have the answer to the last one. Okay, so again, always start with your given. So you'll notice the first statement is what we were given right there. So that's your reason. This is another one of the given statements. So again, the reason we know it's true is because it's given. Okay, then it says that angle ABD is congruent to CBD. Well, BD bisected this angle. So this angle right here, this big one, was cut in half. So when things are cut in half, then we know that the 2 pieces are congruent. So that's a definition of an angle bisector. Okay, BD is congruent to BD. That's like saying something is congruent to itself. Okay, that's what we call the reflexive property. And then the last one, remember, whatever you're trying to prove is your last statement. So we were trying to prove the angles were, or the triangles were congruent. So we labeled that these angles were congruent. We said that this side was congruent with itself. And then don't forget, it told us that AB is congruent to CB. That was one of the givens. So let's see what we have here. Side, angle, side. And that's how we know the triangles are congruent. Okay, so not too long, but it does get a little harder when you have to fill in this information. So what I have next is already kind of like the obvious pieces. The given, actually this was also given. And then what we're trying to prove, side, angle, side. So let's label what we know so far. HI is congruent to JG, okay? HI is parallel to GJ, so we also know these are parallel. And then I always know that the side that's shared is congruent. That's this line right here, line 4. And remember, we call that reflexive property. See if you can think about why GJH is congruent to IHJ. So that's IHJ, that's this angle right here, and this angle right here. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the fact that these sides are parallel. So when we have parallel lines and then a transversal that cuts them, then these angles are always congruent, and those are called alternate interior angles. Okay, so the last proof here, I have it completed underneath. So I'm going to give you a moment to either pause this or take a look. Think about what you would put in for your reasons. Again, these are justifications. These are why we know these statements are true. So here's your time to pause it, and hopefully you come back in just a moment. Okay, so I'm moving on. If you've paused it, here are your answers. And I'm going to label what's true in this picture. So we knew that the vertical angles were congruent. We knew that these sides were congruent, and these ones because of that midpoint and what we know about what a midpoint is. Okay, so we're done with proofs for side, angle, side. And the last one we're going to do today in this video for congruencies is side, side, side. So it's our last one. Okay. So if we know that all three sides of one triangle correspond or congruent to all the three sides of another triangle, then automatically those triangles are congruent. So if side AB is congruent to DE, side BC is congruent to EF, and side AC is congruent to DF, then we can say that those triangles are congruent. Okay. These are really straightforward. We don't use any angles, just the three sides. Okay. So some of these triangles might be congruent, but we're going to specifically look and see if we have a side, side, side situation. Okay. So here we have a side, an angle, and then remember we always know the side they share is congruent. So we have a side, side, angle. We do not have enough information to say those triangles are congruent. The next one we have is a side. We know vertical angles are congruent, and that's only two corresponding parts. So no, we do not have enough information. Next one. All right, take a look. Side, side, and side. Yes, we know these are congruent triangles. All right, next one we have an angle that's congruent and a side that they share, and that's all we know. That is not enough information to say that those triangles are congruent. Okay, next one's kind of cool because we have a side pair, and then the side that they share we'll mark with one line. And so we actually have the side, side, side congruency here. All right, last one, we've got angles that are congruent, and then the side that they share. So that's angle side. That's not a triangle congruency. So no, we do not have enough information to say that these triangles are congruent. Sorry guys, I'm taking a water break. This is a lot of talking. Okay, We'll do what we did before, find some missing information to say these triangles are congruent. Remember, we're doing side, side, side now. Okay, so sides, we know the one they share is congruent, so the one we're missing is JL congruent to ML. Over next door, we have side, side, and then the one we're missing is RT. Oops, RT being congruent to, and then I'm going to make sure I'm labeling these in the correct order, TKI. Okay, let's try out a couple more of these. My paper got printed a little funky, so I'm going to move down a little bit. I'm going to start on number 13. Okay, so we're seeing, do we have side, side, side congruency? We've got a side marked right here, the side that they share, so the missing information is the one with 3 lines. VF needs to be congruent to TU. Okay, number 14, the side that they're missing is right here. So JL needs to be congruent to CE. Okay, number 15, sides are labeled, the one they share, so we've got our missing ones right here. GT needs to be congruent to ST. Something very similar over on number 16. I'm not even going to label the side that they share. I'm just going to label that we need to know these sides are congruent. So XJ needs to be congruent to IJ. All right, and then last two before we try a proof. We've got, it's hard to see, but these two sides right here, the one they share. So then the one we're missing is UN. Needs to be congruent to ML. All right, and then last one, the side that's not labeled yet, SU needs to be congruent to MK. All right, so we're going to try out some proofs with side, side, side. We're going to do one together, and then I'll give you some time to try the next one. All right, so don't forget, always start with the given. PQ is congruent to ST, that was given. Also given, and also given. Those were all in the given statement, so this one's really easy. So I'm going to label what we know is true. So PQ is congruent to ST, QR is congruent to TR, and R is the midpoint of PS, so we know this is the middle. So if something is the middle, we know the two side pieces are congruent. So that's the definition of a midpoint. I have now stated that all 3 sides are congruent. And so we can say, using SSS, or side, 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 that these triangles are congruent. So remember, that's what we were trying to prove. Okay, so I would like you to pause this, try this next one out, very similar to the one above, and once you pause, come back and we'll go over the answers. Okay, so hopefully you tried this out and you're back from your pause. Here are your answers. So we have the 2 givens, that JL is congruent to MN. K is the midpoint of those 2 sides, so we know these had to be congruent, and we knew those had to be congruent. And then we know the triangles are congruent. Okay, so there's our work on side, 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 angle, side, angle, and side, angle, side. Just to kind of end our video off, I want to go back to the screen for our proof tips in case you want to save that or screenshot that. And in our next video, we'll work on our last 2 triangle congruencies. Okay, thanks so much for watching, guys. Bye-bye.